Scott Morrison's further stirred up China with his announcement of a rescue mission for the thousands of pro-democracy Hong Kong visa holders and students in Australia who are wanting to flee, and why wouldn't they, the communist regime after these new security laws were imposed, laws that could see them arbitrarily punished for speaking out or even imprisoned for life. Now, in addition to offering work rights and a path to citizenship for these Chinese freedom fighters, the PM has suspended our extradition treaty with Hong Kong, issued travel warnings to Aussies contemplating a trip to China, and of course, this follows his calls for an international investigation into the origins of the coronavirus. However, Population Minister Alan Tudge couldn't guarantee Australian residency this morning.
This would be a clearer pathway for permanent residency at the end of the 5-year period that we are talking about. Now, you would still have to apply for it. You still have to pass the character test, the national security tests and the like. So it's not automatic, but it's certainly an easier pathway to permanent residency.
Well, the ensuing war of words came as China imposed retaliatory tariffs on some of our exports and issued travel warnings of its own to Chinese students and citizens. China's hit back, telling us not to interfere with its internal affairs, can you believe that, and sabre-rattling with further big stick threats to punish us. China is all about control and it's intent on teaching us a lesson because for years it's been successfully implementing its strategy to control and influence Australia and other countries. And for years it's been grooming or buying politicians here and infiltrating all areas of our society, from buying up our land and spying on our industries, stealing our IP, investing in essential services and making a mockery of our foreign investment laws. And we'll come to the universities later. China doesn't need to go to war with us. It owns so much of us already, and consecutive governments have been handing them the keys. So it's quite refreshing that Scott Morrison's had a wake-up call. It may be too late, but he's savvy enough of a politician to read the temperature of the community, and he must know that we've reached boiling point over this Chinese takeaway of our country. Now, Kai, you're a Chinese Australian. What do you think about this whole issue with Hong Kong? I mean, in terms of freedom of speech, it's just so terrifying now. I know I'm one of these people that would certainly not go to Hong Kong anymore and get that cheap handbag, because I've got a view that I'd probably end up in a Chinese prison looking at, you know, the view from outside in Beijing or somewhere.
Well, look, I certainly understand why people would be worried about if you were in Hong Kong at the moment. Look, I mean, you know, my family, my father came from mainland China to Australia, and he got out just before the Great Leap, just before the Cultural Revolution, rather, and he came via Hong Kong. And just, you know, the generosity of this country to him is obviously one of the reasons why I'm here at all. You know, but look, on the other hand, I do, like, this is the kind of thing that is going to antagonise China, and our relationship with them has been deteriorating. Now, I understand that many people want us to be able to stand up to China. In fact, a lot of people want to stand up to China's soft power and the way that it's working its way, you know, around the world, whether it's through the One Belt, One Road policy or other ways. But nevertheless, China still is going to be an important trading partner for Australia. It still is, and I know some would like us to lessen that dependence on China. But is it really in Australia's interest to be poking China so much at the moment?
Well, the problem is, though, Kai, we haven't. You know, we've capitulated and gone about our business, and while they have been like a cancer infiltrating all our, you know, areas and you know, whether it be universities or businesses, you know, and it's just really worry that we've been asleep at the wheel. And I really feel that now, I mean, Michael, you must have a view on the fact that there are now calls for, you know, China to be questioned about its human rights violations, because for years it has violated human rights, but it's really demonstrating it now with these pro-democracy fighters in Hong Kong.
Well, that's right. I think, Prue, almost on every measurement, the world has treated China differently than it would treat any other major economy. And there's a problem with that in that China wants to play in the big league. They want to supplant America and become the world hegemon. Oh, that's their right to want it. But if you're going to want something like that, you're going to have to act like a grown-up. And too often, sadly, China act like petulant teenagers. And when you take the human rights situation, for example, I note that in London, I think it is recently, some expat Uyghurs have finally launched a campaign or a case to the International Court to try to have the situation with the Uyghur population of China's west brought to some kind of judicial attention. Now, look, I mean, I think almost the evidence is beyond dispute out there, but the truth is it'll be like the South China Sea. There'll be a finding at some point, no doubt. It'll be against China, and they'll ignore it. The question is, what does the world do when they ignore these international decisions? Do we treat China like any other developed economy and punish them? Or do we just turn away and say, oh, well, that's China for you, but, you know, we've got $1 trillion of trade on the line, so we better go quiet and carry on because, you know, got to keep exporting that beef. I think Scott Morrison is showing the way here, with Donald Trump, to be fair, and Western economies are now starting to come together and have a uniform approach to China, and that's going to be the key, isn't it? Because if Australia goes out unilateral, China will squash us. America can go unilateral, they're big enough, but beyond that, everyone's got to be united. And the West, for a long time, has had squabbles with Trump and therefore with America or, with us or whatever. We've all got to come together. United, we're bigger than China, much bigger than China. We can trade our way out of this together if we have to, but we've got to be united.
You're 100% right. But the problem is, you look at the UN, China has virtually bought the vote of so many countries through its Belt and Road project and others. And this is the problem, that they're getting away with it and people, are, wooed by the dollar. But what they don't understand is they're just risking everything and putting all of us at risk in the future because it will infiltrate so much. I mean, Liz, let's look at the poor people of Hong Kong, these really brave pro-democracy fighters. I mean, there's been calls to actually make them refugees and bring them out here, and I support that. The Chinese, ever since the 1800s, have been living here and supporting us, and they're diligent workers, and I think the idea of having these refugees here with their skills, their intelligence, their bravery would be a great attribute for this country.
Certainly, these freedom fighters will make great Aussies. And I think what China has seen here as a real show of strength is actually crippling it. The Western democracies and Asian democracies, which are in fact the wealthier ones in the world, are increasingly banding together against this Chinese dictatorship. The CCP's besties are slowly becoming the ones with absolutely no global economic clout to speak of. Moves like this by China are waking one after another, each country up to the fact that we are up against a communist dictatorship here. They do not play balls like us. We were talking just earlier about the human rights violations on the world stage. What these guys are committing against the Uyghurs is absolutely hair-raising. They've gotten away with it for ages. We're all aware of the detention camps. We're all aware of them sterilising these Uyghur women, basically committing genocide right under our noses. And as Michael said, we've got two options. You either look the other way and just go, well, we've got way too much money on the line here in terms of trade, or you wade in, and I think Scott Morrison is doing a brilliant job of maintaining that diplomacy as best you can with what is now an extremely openly quite hostile country toward Australia, and not just Australia, which is where we're seeing this terrific banding together of nations. I think it's great, and I think we're going to see a lot more of it in the future as we make more and more trade agreements and so on and so forth, as more and more countries shut China out.
Well, let's hope so. I mean, China is all about saving face and, they're rapidly becoming the pariah of the world, which must worry them. But it's just also fascinating how under this leader, you know, Xi Jinping, he's really seen to becoming, you know, more emboldened, and rather than doing their usual sort of insidious infiltration, they're really showing their hand, which is very unusual and quite alarming, I feel.
Yeah. I just wanted to add one thing as well, Prue, off the back of what you're saying about the people of Hong Kong, and that is there's another group out there that would blend very well into Australian society, particularly into rural Australian society, and we've all gone quiet about them, and that is the South African farmers.
Yeah,
I mean, I agree with you. I'm in favour of bringing the people of Hong Kong out, or a percentage. I mean, but the truth is they'll basically go to Sydney and Melbourne, and the government, I saw Alan Tudge in the paper the other day saying, oh, we're going to really encourage these people to go out to the countryside. Well, it's not going to happen. So, you know, the South African farmers are a very, seems, persecuted group. Again, it's the government or people in the government that are hounding down on them. And look, I understand South Africa's troubled history. I get that. But we can't judge people today from the sins of the father. And if it's good enough for the government to really try to roll a welcome mat out, the red carpet for people of Hong Kong, and I agree with it, I don't know why the same carpet hasn't applied to the farmers of South Africa. I think they tick a lot of boxes.
100%, I agree with you. I mean, we need people like this, people who are brave, who are contributing to society. Some of the Aussie farmers might say, hang on, what about us? We're in a lot of trouble ourselves. Do we need more? But I think the more we can bring people out who are going to contribute to this country, they're the kind of workers we want here, surely.
Well, the last thing I would probably say is I think it's just great to hear our Conservative panel speaking so favourably of ethnic Chinese, such as the ones from Hong Kong, because I think, honestly, sometimes I think Conservatives sometimes focus on migrants that come to this country that maybe don't fit in so well and don't contribute, when in reality, I think the majority or a lot of them that come to this country, including, as you mentioned, the Hong Kong Chinese, they bring a lot to the table, and they love what they found here in the West.